Thanks for that, Julie. So we have pre-circulated a number of documents to you last week, which has hopefully been helpful in terms of setting the scene for this workshop. It is going to be a bit of a big day, but we are going to try and make it as enjoyable as possible. Today we will be starting with Sarah. She is going to take you through some more of the financial strategy aspects. Then there'll be a break. Then we will come back and Aidan will be briefly discussing the network infrastructure objectives that we sent round. Then we will jump into our activity areas where we will start working through levels of service, priorities and focus areas, and starting to understand what some key projects that you might have on your minds in those particular areas. I will also, before that session, put up a schedule so that you can understand the different activity areas and which workshop will be covering which area. And again, we will be pre-circulating information before each of those as well, so you can think of your questions. And just that is an important thing here. If you do have questions on any of the pre-circulated information, please send them through to me and I can get them to staff, and then we can come a little bit more prepared with those as well. So yeah, we'll have that later this afternoon, but for now I'll hand over to Sarah and she can take you on this journey.
Morena, now hopefully I can at least advance us significantly before the lunch break, because I know Kendall's really keen to get on to the workshops where you actually can start to talk about those level of service. I guess why financial strategy, we wanted to cover some of this off today. This is a cornerstone strategy of your long-term plan, and it also does set the scene for a number of things, including your level of service discussions. So again, a good place to start. So today we're going to outline the key parts. Now the reason I wanted to do that is there's a few that I will be proposing additions to this financial strategy in the current environment. Also provide context for the review of the financial strategy, so when and how you'll be involved, and then kick off discussions with the first two parts of the financial strategy, which are the financial sustainability in a regulated environment. That's one of our new ones, and also rates and kind of impact of that revenue ceiling by way of the rates cap. So those are two fairly big topics to have a deep dive into, but I will do my best. So financial strategy, a recap, and I know this has been covered in your induction sessions and for the elected members who have been here in previous training, this won't be anything new to you, but it does outline the financial vision for the next 10 years. That's a strategic document, it's a high level, it balances the needs of the community, responsible management of assets and financial sustainability over the long term. It also underpins Council's financial performance, what are the key factors for financial success, or on the opposite side of that coin, the risks. And it gives key areas for governance, monitoring, oversight. So I know Bruce, our chair of our Risk and Assurance Committee, is really keen on tracking these financial strategy outcomes because it gives him a good idea of the types of things we should be looking at for if that would derail the financial strategy. So really good monitoring and oversight tool as well for elected members. So the draft financial strategy and I linked the last one because it's always good to have a bit of a recap as to where we've come from, the kind of feel of the financial strategy. But this document, so what happens during the development of it, so obviously as council officers are your key advisors here, we develop this as the long-term plan develops in conjunction with you. So elected members obviously get the opportunity throughout the development to set direction, test assumptions, make decisions on those limits, trade-offs and risk appetite, and then formally adopted at the end of the long-term plan process after consultation with your community. So there's a lot of things that feed into the financial strategy, and it does develop over time because there are obviously so many interrelated links. So the key parts, actually if you just skip through them all and they can have them all in the, so this is the key parts of the financial strategy. So all the ones that I've highlighted in red are what I will be proposing as new parts, given their their importance in the scheme of financial sustainability in your financial strategy. So I won't go over the darker ones, but I'll probably more dive into some of those new ones, and it will give you the opportunity to feedback if you think there's anything we are missing. So financial sustainability in a regulated environment. Obviously regulatory oversight impacts financial outcomes, and it can impact investment timing, allowed rates of returns, so your revenue, your debt capacity and leveraging. So a lot of links to your financial sustainability. So that interlink with regulatory oversight needs to be well communicated through a financial strategy. So that's a new part. In the unexpected events and changes, I guess in hindsight, over the last few years, we've been managing a few compliance and legal risks, which in the current environment have become probably more inflated. A number of reasons for that, changing compliance, changing regulation, changing legislation, being in a financial position where, there are a number of legal challenges. So that's often one that's closely related to financial strategy, and when we've been looking at the risks through risk and assurance lens, that's often one that comes up quite regularly. So I thought it would be remiss not to make sure we talk about that, but that's just under that unexpected events and changes. Insurance is a new item now, again, closely related to legal compliance, but a lot more broad. This obviously has such an impact on the probable loss and the amount of loss that council can absorb. We have done a lot of work in the insurance space in the last few years to understand more the relationship between insurance and our assets, and coming back to that probable loss modelling and a lot of the things we've been working on with risk and assurance. So insurance has become a large part of our financial strategy. It's also directly linked to rates, debt headroom, reserves and unexpected events. Insurable events have increased, and the understanding of our insurance environment has been key. So that's the addition there. Property and asset rationalisation new. This is a proposed new one in the rates cap environment. So that's not about just selling assets, but it's about actually having those discussions up front on where we're at from a asset perspective, and are there any areas where we might want to rationalise assets. So that's about having those upfront conversations, as well as the fact that our development itself has actually become quite a large part of our financial strategy, and likely to going forward.
May I ask questions as we go?
Sorry, I didn't say that, but no, happy to take questions as you go. I am making sure I allow at the end as well for, hey, let's check in on each topic, but happy to take questions.
Because I did just have a question noted just about how we use that housing and property investment fund, because right now any sale proceeds go in there and it can only be used a certain way.
Yes.
Will we have a chance to look at that?
Yes, so that will absolutely be part of that review of the financial strategy. Now, the context for which that was put in place was, hey, we want to keep this level of assets. So if you sell assets to subsidise rates, then you end up with a lower level of assets. So, it's like any asset sales process. We wanted to make sure we maintain that level of assets, but I actually expect that's what we will be reviewing, as well as the fact that in a rates capped environment, it's obviously desirable to decrease your debt, and potentially looking at how that might link in with your debt and where you want to go from a debt perspective as well. So yeah, all of those are interrelated, and again why I am recommending that we add that one in there from a strategic financial element perspective. Yeah.
Councillor Leonard.
This is great, Sarah, but I don't know, I'm feeling like maybe the cart before the horse. I don't know where this is going to go, but I'm just going to throw it out there. Is there a point to us having a discussion before we get into these key parts around, as an organisation, the level of risk that we're prepared to take? Because I'm looking at all of these things and actually thinking it actually comes back to, in essence, what is our risk appetite, and having a full and frank discussion on that, because where I might sit, where somebody else might sit around the table, and understanding actually what does that look like, you know. So if we're putting up security for borrowing, are we prepared to take that risk? Are we not? Debt, you know, like I just wonder about that holistic conversation, just to kind of be on a page, because I wonder then otherwise are we going to get into these discussions and then not form a view properly? I'm not saying what you've presented is fantastic, but I just wonder if there's a philosophical, you know, sort of a governance conversation.
Could just hear the current appetite rather.
Yes.
Yeah, but it actually comes over all
Everything.
of...
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, agreed. And we've had these conversations in the context of level of service discussions as well as exec. And from my understanding, and I've just stealing Julie's knowledge here, but from my understanding, we are ahead of the game from an LTP perspective, and these things will develop as we go. So I think when I was talking about unexpected events and changes and some of those interlinks, it's through the risk and assurance work that those have been added in, and again we are managing those strategic risks through risk and assurance. Council have just reset their risk appetite, and that's kind of led to them being in here. But I totally understand what you're saying, the cart before the horse, because insurance is a really good example. We're actually planning to have those discussions at risk and assurance, but I guess what we're trying to set here is generally we think this is where it's going, these are the things we need to consider in the current environment, but it will be developing over the next 18 months. So I don't expect we'll get it's not a firm decision point. It will be an iterative, hey, let me know your feelings on that, let me know your thoughts, give me some direction, and then that's how it kind of all comes together at the end. Yeah. So that's the intent. And again, I actually did have that in my notes, but I skipped past. I was like, I wrote too many notes. Now we're up to future of the sector. So that's one I'm proposing may be in there. Now look, just understand that we've got a few proposals out there, such as future for, regional councils. Again, I know that's only just discussion document at this point, but I know there is some work underway in the sector, generally speaking, to have a look at that future of the sector. So that may or may not be advanced enough to include in your financial strategy, but probably just calling it out that, depending on the direction, depending on the strength of or the speed of the work, probably more than anything, just depends on whether that will be included or not, but just flagging that one. And before we move on from that, I guess I really want these sessions to be about as the kind of key financial advisor, we will be putting together the strategy for you, but I want everyone to have their say in the development, because that's going to end up, in this challenging environment or changing environment, that'll end up with the best outcome, given there may be a number of changes along the way. So really want to stop there and take any thoughts on if you kind of think this is generally the key parts of the financial strategy, or if there's any you think I might have missed.
Kia ora, Sarah. Just one consideration that I would, and I'm probably going to sound like a broken record to the councillors, but I'm going to go there, is the consideration for our approach to treaty obligations, and whether or not that needs to be part of the overall financial strategy, how that might be framed. So ensuring we are taking taking that alongside all the other things we need to consider as a valid point to go through when we're making decisions.
Yeah, and I think Kendall, correct me if I'm wrong, as project manager, but totally agree that that needs to be built in the long-term plan, and you'll be looking at as part of your overall strategic directives and community outcomes work that is being done, and then it's linked to financial strategy. Kind of depends on the that overall direction that's set. So I've written it here.
So it's not an actual point along the financial strategy itself?
So probably closely related, and again, if we look at levels of service and infrastructure, it's interlinked with Tony's infrastructure strategy, which again talks about obligations, particularly in the project space and with the work we're doing and the level of service. So it is interrelated, not normally a separate part, but again, I've written it down to have a think about what that might look like and have a look if there are any other councils out there that have that in their financial strategy and what the key parts kind of contain. But I've written that down. I'll have a look at it.
I might just jump in here too, Councillor Foreman, just acknowledging that in previous LTPs we've actually had a statement up front in our long-term plan, not necessarily in the financial strategy. So maybe it's part of the long-term plan conversation, but not necessarily in this particular document too.
To be fair, I would like it considered in all aspects of council life. So that's why I'm just noted it. There isn't really anything in the financial strategy, so I would expect something.
Yeah, just to further that though, this is a chapter or a part of the long-term plan, and last time in particular it was up the front, so just acknowledging that.
Please carry on.
Okay, no further comments. We'll move on to our first deep dive. Now, this was one of our new ones, and so hopefully I've provided enough context here on what I suggest this might look like. So we've obviously got the Commerce Commission likely providing regulatory oversight on 3 waters, development levies and rates caps. Now I'll put a little to be confirmed because we have confirmation that there will be regulators for development levies and rates cap. We don't have confirmation on who that will be. However, I know the sector have fed back to central government that would make sense for it all to be the same regulator, but yeah, we're not obviously sure yet. So that covers kind of all growth assumptions and growth spend. That covers obviously 3 waters, but also that rates cap kind of covers the rest of council spend, in particular oversight on how we're spending in relation to other parts of the legislation. So I assume core services will be included in that oversight as well. Generally, again, I know Julie and I have got a little bit of background in the electricity sector and probably have that insight, but generally economic regulators will influence, as I said earlier, investment timing and to some extent approval of investment, allowed rates of return, so what you can charge for your water services charges or rates in our case, and debt capacity and leverage expectations. So some of that intergenerational funding considerations, are we funding too much from current ratepayers, not enough on future, vice versa. So the oversight can affect your balance sheet strength, your financial sustainability. It's not just kind of an audit as I think some people may think. It also affects our financial management data. So look, at the moment, some of the data we use to make decisions is maybe not as thorough as what you'd expect in a regulatory environment, and so probably there will need to be recognition that we'll need to evolve in that space. So these are the kind of key considerations which affect your financial management, financial sustainability. I expect we'll include. Budget setting and adherence also will have regulatory oversight. So normally there is, you've got your carrots and your sticks in a regulatory environment, and generally speaking, the practices on financial management and budgeting need to evolve because there are consequences by not adhering to your budget. So by being over or under budget, there are consequences. And I know the executive team got a chance to talk to Unison, which was a really helpful session for us, and talk about those as well and how it impacts them. Pardon me, I've been talking too fast trying to get done by lunchtime. These all have an impact on financial sustainability. So we have to link these into the financial strategy. And the financial strategy needs to answer, how do we remain viable, resilient and fair in that regulatory environment? So look, that's just a really high-level oversight, given, again, the evolution of information we have in this context. But I definitely expect, given the interlink to your financial sustainability, that will be in there, probably in word form, but it does depend if we have any more information around some of those really key metrics we need to track, and that you guys will need to track from a financial strategy perspective. So, any feedback, direction or questions on that regulated environment topic?
You're not allowed any. You're regulated.
Yeah.
So this all becomes part of the KPIs, where it's reported on monthly.
Yeah, so it really depends on how this develops, because at the moment we're working on really high level assumptions. So that's why I've kind of presented, look, we know what regulatory oversight looks like in other sectors. Executive, again, had a little bit of external, what would we call it, Julie? A session with external parties on what regulatory looks like, particularly in the electricity sector where it's been well established for quite some time. As well as the fact Julie and I have a little bit of a background there. So just knowing the impact of the regulatory environment, we know this is going to be a key part of your financial strategy.
Duncan, wake up.
Or just adding to that too, Sarah, we thought it may be helpful. We did appreciate Unison in terms of their generous time with us as a team to be able to learn from them, and we thought that might be something for the Water Services Committee again to pick up too and have the same presentation at some stage too. So, the electricity sector's been sort of working in this mode for about 20 years. We have quite a bit of catch up in terms of local government. So the more we can learn from the electricity industry, probably the better. And that was also intended to give Sarah a slight break so she could have a drink.
Wahine, are you next?
Oh yeah, thanks Sarah for that. Not so much a question, but just kind of an acknowledgement of all of the different layers that come with the financial side of things and the different environments that we're entering into. I think maybe a suggestion, not so much in terms of the overall financial sustainability and regulated environment, but it could be that maybe we do some mahi on the communication side to the wider community to bring them along on this journey, as well as just kind of as opposed to just providing the long-term plan and it might be a series of getting them informed and up to speed on these different levels of changes, because it's quite a lot and it's at a hard and fast pace too. So I think the sooner we can start issuing or distributing information around the massive changes that are coming at local government, the better for our community.
Yeah, completely agree, and I think it has been challenging just to manage that in the context of we getting drip fed information too, but agree, it is a big change. It's a big change moving to that regulatory environment, and being in that utilities space similar to the electricity sector.
Councillor Greenslade.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. I would like a deeper dive into the decision making and where we're going with the differences between intergenerational debt and versus current ratepayers. I happen to be a great believer in intergenerational debt. It does mean that current ratepayers don't get to pay for everything and the generations to come get it all. And also too, perhaps sort of some background on those that are already in place as well too, where the decision has been made on intergenerational and current.
Totally agree, Councillor Greenslade is one of this. So all of the key parts we will be doing these deep dives on. So debt is one of those. I think just probably of note and where things are slightly different, because I totally agree, and that has been the history of local government. That's intergenerational debt is very important. When I look over to our peers in New South Wales who've had rates caps for a number of years, I also see intergenerational equity concepts degrading a little bit because debt is not ideal when you're in a rates cap environment with interest rate fluctuations. And of course debt is our mechanism to spread intergenerational equity. So totally get that. But yeah, there's a few other considerations this time that we need to have a look through and work through how that will work in a rates capped environment.
Councillor Cameron.
The irony is we're being regulated to keep costs down, but reporting to the regulator is going to probably cost us a bomb. With your interactions with the energy sector, have they given any indication about what it actually costs them to maintain the reporting levels that are expected? Do we have a good guide, is what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think that was, again, when Unison came in, I feel sorry for them because now I seem to be getting them lots of work because they're actually presenting to Taupō as well on the same line as what we got as an exec team and what we're proposing. We might see if they'll come back for at elected member level. But I probably don't want to share too much of their thoughts because they're their thoughts, but what I was surprised at is actually how positively they're seeing the regulator this far on. Being in the industry a number of years ago, certainly my experience was a different level of maybe frustration with the increased costs, but I think what I picked up from them is the electricity sector is moving on and actually seeing the benefits of that regulation. But I suspect 20 years ago that would have cost, again, similar to what we're seeing here, we need a couple of roles. So we need roles to manage the cost separation, we need roles to manage that link with the regulator and the information disclosures that are on top of all of the other financial disclosures we already make.
Yeah, and I'd argue that it didn't work out that well considering the energy sector was instructed to increase their fees by 21% because they hadn't been investing adequately. So I would suggest the regulation didn't help much.
Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, I just point out, I think the one thing missing so far anyway is the consideration of the long-term sustainability for ratepayers who are they're the consumers, they're our customers, and the inflation, the rate of inflation of consumer inflation is what they experience, and anything above that, frankly, is not sustainable in the long term, and it hasn't been, and retirees being unable to stay in their homes because they can't afford the rates is certainly a symptom that it's not working, and I'm sure that is happening out there. And my own point of view on this is that we should be setting a target linked to inflation and reverse engineering it back from that, and that all that comes after that.
Thanks, Councillor Campbell. We'll be covering rates and rates cap in the next bit of my presentation. So getting on to that, hold that thought. Any other feedback or direction on the regulatory environment?
12:30 is approaching.
I thought for this one it's important to look backwards because it does help with context on going forward. So this is our rates graph from the previous long-term plan. During the previous long-term plan, we obviously had the ability to set our own rates increase and what our financial strategy limit was. Now, if you see the black triangles, that is our financial strategy limit, which is our GCI plus 5%. So our GCI plus 5% was used. So local government cost index is the LGCI. So similar to CPI, but in the local government sector. So again, those economic drivers of inflation. Now, the reason why we set the financial strategy limit at being plus 5% was the recognition of the assumptions around the growth in the Taupō district. So essentially, when you're in a growing district, there is some form of acceptance, or was some form of acceptance, I should say, that there is some spend that you do have to do as local government upfront for that growth. So that gave us a little bit of a higher financial strategy limit based on our growth projections. However, as you can see in the green line, our prospective rates increases for the first 2 years was above that line. Now, why didn't we set a financial strategy limit over that? I think even at the time there was general recognition that the rates increases were unaffordable. They weren't ideal. That's not where we wanted to be, and we didn't want to set a limit that essentially said that was okay. So that's kind of last long-term plan. Obviously, that shows where we had expected to go for the rest of the 10 years. Now, I'm not a big advocate of looking at past the third year because things change substantially between long-term plans. That's why you have the ability to reset every 3 years rather than waiting out the 10. But again, it does give perspective of where we kind of thought our costs were based on the information we had at the time.
So the Chair, can I make an observation, if you like? I mean, if you look at the last two LTPs before that one, the graphs looked, from recollection, quite the same in that it's the first couple of years that we're hiking things up, but things are all settling down. But if you think about that, if you're doing that every 3 years, well, it never really, it doesn't settle down. So I'm just saying, it always seems to be a bunch of wishful thinking, past the first couple of years anyway.
Yeah, just responding to that, I do agree. So the last two long-term plans have looked like that, and totally agree also. It's based off the information we've got at the time, and we do spend a lot more time on the first 3 years like anything, because those are the years that are coming up. So we can only make a number of assumptions for the rest of the 10 years, which is challenging. But I just want to say, so the LTP, again, I wasn't here, but from my understanding of the previous LTPs, so the 2021, there were a couple of projects up front that was driving that increase. And then the 2018, if you actually look back at that, it was a reasonably steady rates increase, and it was sitting just about all of them below 5. 2018, and I was in local government at the time, was a very different local government environment, a very different infrastructure construction environment back then too. Certainly the last long-term plan and the annual plans before that, post-COVID, we have really been in a period of infrastructure construction, which has impacted on depreciation. And I have got some stats on that somewhere as a result of previous Lagoima, but I know in 1 year we increased depreciation 30%, I think it was. So that's a significant impact on rates. So that's, you know, I think that was about 20% on rates.
I suppose my point is, every 3 years you have a look at it, you always find a reason to jack it up, and I mean, that just seems to be life.
And then add to that,
unless you're prepared to absolutely draw a hard line.
well, that would be great if we had control of construction inflation nationally and internationally, because that was the other compounding factor. some costs in the construction industry through that time. I think in one quarter, insurance, for example, went up 20%. In that same quarter, concrete went up 18%. Then the following quarter, 30%. That's cumulative. The prices never come back from those highs. We don't have control over that.
Yeah, and I think through the chair, we've got to remember that the decisions which end in, ultimately rates as a method of charging revenue based on the projects and the services you're delivering. And these have been consulted with the community. If you remember through the last long-term plan, I think it was 74% of people wanted us to do the same or more. And that's the challenge, and that's the challenge sitting at this table, because remembering this table's the table that makes the decisions. And when the community want services and need council services, that's a hard position. I don't envy you in making those decisions. So,
well, through the chair, just to respond to that, I mean, part of the answer, I believe, is if construction costs are going up, and this is only just a portion of council spending, of course, build less and build it smarter can be done.
So we don't build infrastructure.
You build smaller infrastructure and you build it smarter.
Hey, so this has been recorded, folks, so if you want to speak, you need to press your microphone. And when you finish speaking, please turn it off.
So that leads us to setting the scene for this long-term plan. So we know for a fact we will have rates caps. So that has been as a result of legislation proposed by central government. We know the formula will be, the range will be between 2 and 4%, which at this stage is saying excluding growth in waters. However, we're still awaiting the formula. So where we end up as a cap perspective, remember that's only a cap. That doesn't mean that you can't go below that. That's a maximum. We are awaiting the formula to figure out kind of where that sits, and also the impact on the org again. A little bit of coming back to Councillor Leonard's point, is this cart before the horse, but at the same time we do know enough to kind of proceed and again develop this over time. Julie looked like she was going to say something.
I guess I was probably just acknowledging the challenge that we're in, and that we have a process and a time frame that we have to work to. We are working on a ministerial announcement that said between 2 and 4, but when you can't apply a formula to actually work out how it gets to 2 to 4, or have certainty in that formula until perhaps around June this year, just probably couldn't keep my frustration inside to be able to state that we're moving forward based on simply what we know at this point in time.
Just a question, if I may. I've seen waters mentioned as being excluded before, but not growth. That seems like quite a subjective word. Is there any? Can you just tell us a little bit more detail around what aspects you think that might mean?
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean gross spend. I mean, the central government has said that it will be based on dollars increases, not quantity increases. So we have got increased ratepayers. So at the moment, those percentages you saw on the last slide exclude growth, because that's the impact on existing ratepayers. So that's how we've calculated our rates increases anyway. It's just the additional ratepayers that will be excluded at this point in time. Again, working off some discussion documents and the information we've got at the time.
Through the chair, I just wanted to follow on with what Councillor Delatour was saying. We're a council that's in a growth phase. There's no doubt about that. And you look at some older established councils across New Zealand, they're not going to have anything like the challenges that we've got. And I suppose it's a sort of very arbitrary, isn't it? Which is what our CEO is actually saying, the frustration of actually trying to acknowledge the fact that we are increasing our population probably by the hour, actually, certainly by the week, and here we are being faced with a situation where we can't cater for those people.
Yeah, and I think not just population but ratepayer growth, because if you look at our ratepayer growth compared to population growth, on a percentage basis we're much higher, given we do have houses that are either short term or not filled all the time, but we still have to provide services to those ratepayers. So we are working in all other forms of legislation to ratepayers, yet it has in the proposed formula again, which is awaiting clarification because there are a number of challenges with applying that, but there were growth metrics in there, but it was population growth, there was a residential housing growth number in there, but again there was no real context as to how that's applied. There was, I heard, suggestions that it might be on a regional basis too. So again, I can't really comment on where we're going to land, whether growth will be adequately factored in or not. But that's still got you, although the point is that's still got you along a scale. We know the scale was 2 to 4%. So whatever those factors that were applied led to, it was just whether you were sitting close to the 2% or close to the 4%.
Councillor Campbell.
Through the chair, I'll just point out one advantage of being a holiday place, even though we are getting increased ratepayers, is that a lot of the time those ratepayers, yes, we build the infrastructure for them, but they're not actually here. So there's actually less demand on the infrastructure for much of the year, and that's roading and water, wastewater. So I mean, it's not entirely bad.
Yeah, I think I'm probably not the right person to talk about that, but I have been in the sector long enough to know that that catering for peak growth or peak days is significantly challenging for infrastructure teams in particular, as well as the fact that we can't not provide or not allow for provision of services all year round, and actually if those houses were filled more of the time, that doesn't mean we're not allowed to allow for them. So again, from a legislative perspective, we have to supply services to those houses. But Tony's probably more, I've heard a lot of things over the years about actually wear and tear on pipes. Again, Tony, I'm doing a great job being a waters person when Tony's the expert, but wear and tear on pipes when they're not completely full for all year round, and then how big the pipes have to be. But Tony's might be best to come in on that.
Through the chair, Sarah, the reality of it is that those people who are not here are not investing in our community economically when they're not here. So there is actually a downside to it, and I can tell you every weekend in Turangi I can't get through the door of the New World supermarket, and that's all my ratepayers all turned up for the weekend and they're not here during the week. But it's a moot point. I get what Councillor...
Perfect. Tony didn't want to comment on water pipes. He thought I'd done an excellent job of explaining it.
So moving right along.
And talking about stuff that I should be able to explain. If you go back. So while we're awaiting detail, we do know some of the financial sustainability impact based on some of our peers overseas who have had rates capping for a number of years, which does give us the benefit of being able to have a look at how that kind of played out. So just interestingly, and totally I don't want to get across the perspective that I don't agree with rates caps, because that's not my job to judge, but it was interesting that when I went to New South Wales, that the Auditor General spoke, and 35 councils do not meet any or within no financial sustainability metrics, or up to a third. 16 have insufficient cash and investments to meet 3 months of expenditure. 40% of councils don't break even, and revenue growth is lower than expenditure growth, which results in general negative growth in real terms. So this is from the Auditor General based on audits of the New South Wales local government sector, and probably just hits home a little bit that there will be changes. And so again, not trying to make a judgment on rates caps, whether they're good or bad, but it does hit home that they do have an impact, particularly on services for the community.
Thank you, Duncan.
Am I? Oh. No, can you go back? So costs and core services are prioritised over community outcomes, not just in rates capping, but some other legislation that we're seeing coming out, such as wastewater standards, which I know Tony and the team will discuss at this table in the future. But also really important to note, cost stability is favoured over the lower costs over time approach, and that's another thing that when you look at that rates cap environment, so you think a really good example is interest rate fluctuations, right? Local government used to absorb those, so as interest rates fluctuate, it is cheaper still to borrow short term in the local government sector. So local government have just rode the wave for a cheaper overall interest costs. However, looking at the future is likely, instead of facing those shocks from a service perspective, from a cost perspective, that we will look to stability over the long term on some of those costs, which doesn't necessarily come at the lowest actual costs. And then a reasonable example, I thought this would be really good, and I know Julie wanted to sort of talk about, look, what's our gap? What does this look like? And again, that's coming back to our cart before the horse analogy. It is really hard to show you, but look, I thought I could work through a really reasonable example in the current environment. So look, if our depreciation is $40 million of council costs, an increase of 5% in our asset valuations, which is very light assumption, a modest assumption, but I didn't want to be dramatic about it either. So an increase of 5% is approximately 1.5% on rates. Now, since I did this example, obviously we're having a little bit of an oil shock as well, and having been in the sector long enough to see a few oil shocks over that time, that has a direct correlation, particularly to roading costs, but also across the infrastructure construction space. So 5% probably was I might have changed that had I had that context of the current environment. But we also are looking like, so interest fluctuations, our Treasury advisor has informed us that we have kind of reached the bottom of the market, they believe, and we're on our way up again. What that does mean, unfortunately, because we haven't stabilised for a rates cap environment, that we are probably going to look at a little bit of interest rate fluctuation. So if we say 1% for a reasonable example, that's approximately 2% on rates. So I'm already at 3.5% on rates, and inflation on other expenses. Again, if we assume cost inflation is 3%, that's 2% on rates. So as you can see, our starting point is based off a rates cap, negative 2.5%. So $3 million in operating costs, or some of our other levers, such as increased fees and charges, some of our other levers in relation to what you do in the debt space, asset sales space. There are other levers, but $3 million, and so that's not $3 million once off. That is again cumulative, without taking into account legislative changes, unfunded mandates, and uncontrollable cost increases. And I guess where I was getting to with this, setting the scene for level of service discussions this afternoon, is that we'll need to do things differently, not just at this table, but even internally. So when we set our budgets, we have to do things differently in order to get within a rates cap environment. Righto. Other rating changes, and I just wanted to point it out in case there was any confusion, but we've got the financial strategy which focused on cost and revenue proportion overall, but there are separate policies for revenue and financing. So there will be future sessions to discuss those detailed points like UAGC, whether we keep it the same or increase it or decrease it, or targeted rates, what we want to do in that space, and fees and charges. So if there are high level changes, they may be linked back to the financial strategy, but this is more strategic impact. So there will be a time and place for those detailed discussion on rates and how they're made up. However, new rates will be included in the rates cap. So say you wanted to change the incidence of rates, you wanted to change UAGC, that doesn't mean that all of that has to be covered by your 2 to 4%. So you can affect incidence, but not so much the rates increase.
Through the chair, just say that again, Sarah, because I think So if we want to move the UAGC or targeted rates, and we taking that cost away from the actual rates, it is actually not going to come out of the rates.
Yeah, let's just say, and I'm going to just have an absurd example because I don't want to make one that could be possible, but let's just say that we wanted to plant more trees in Turangi, and we wanted to spend $20 million planting trees, and there was a targeted rate required for that. So we've said we'll have a targeted rate for that $20 million of trees. Well, you actually have to include any increase in cost and increase in rates within the rates cap, so that'll need to come off somewhere else. Yeah, so the new rate, so what I was trying to get to is new rates doesn't mean you can charge more or go outside that 2 to 4%, so it would mean you'd have to make decreases elsewhere to cover it, or if you wanted to shift it, if you wanted to shift things between ratepayers, again, that's council's decision.
That's it. So the point was we were going to spend 20 million, instead of it being spread across the whole district, going to target it, but it's still going to be in there as okay. Well, that's not very good.
And sorry, I before we move on from the rates, so is there any kind of direction from a rates capping perspective? Look, I know it does reduce your flexibility, however, there's a lot of detail in there. Also, there are considerations to make around the timing of the rates caps too. So you've obviously got till 2029 to implement, although central government have said that they will be watching and expect us to apply the rates caps from 2027. Also, what I've heard through previous discussions on rates is that we want to aim to be within that cap by 2027. But again, these are the opportunities we get to have the discussion around that too.
Thank you, Your Worship. There is some validity in Councillor Campbell's comment about starting off where we want to be and working backwards from that. We do that in our own lives. We do that in our own homes. How much have we got, and work back from that. And I would like to know why you don't think we should do that.
No, so I didn't think that's what I had said. But no, I can't remember what Councillor Campbell's comment was specifically.
Oh, from an engineer's point of view, he said we've got a budget, this is how much we've got for the project. So, this is how much we're going to spend, and that's all we can spend, and we'll have to find out. Yeah, so rather than saying, a mandatory is going to be somewhere between 2 and 4%, well, okay, we start at 4% and work backwards.
Yeah, sorry, that was to do with projects. Yeah, so from a project perspective, and again, can only comment on what we've seen overseas, but level of service projects become particularly challenging to find room for, particularly where there's an operating, operational element, because again, any increases from that level of service project then hit your rates cap, so you're then starting off having to take it off elsewhere. One of the comments, or one of the points made in New South Wales was that they receive a lot of state and federal grant funding, but even for level of service projects, they often even with grant funding, it's challenging. But absolutely, as a from an internal budget perspective, we have to do things different. That was kind of my comment that I was making from a work backwards perspective. That is actually what executive are looking at to give the organisation direction on setting their budgets, because we can't, looking at that, we can't rely on people to come to the table with increases when we know we've already made a lot of changes over the last few years from a let's cut things where we can perspective.
And so, Kevin, you're next, but does it follow on from Sandra?
Well, it does, and I guess the answer to the question is in the previous slide, and it's all very well from a political grandstanding or making a statement point of view to say let's just pick a number and work backwards. But if you look at the figures we've had previously, it simply doesn't add up. And yes, in our own household budgets, that's fine, but we don't have central government mandates requiring us to spend money, which requires a certain percentage of increase. So it's a wonderful look at me statement, but it's just practically impossible. It just simply can't happen when you look at the figures we've had previously. The other thing that concerns me is around the 2 to 4% is fine, but the bigger issue here is not so much the financial strategy, it's the comms strategy, because everyone will be expecting, having been primed by central government, that this is what the figure will be, and it simply won't be, because all of the exclusions which people won't have front of mind are going to add to that, and that's not the figure people will take away. Added to that, although the revaluations have gone down this year, is property values go up, broadly speaking, although that's not the case at the moment. But I just think we need to be really, really careful. We make statements like, well, this is what we need to do, that's fine, but in the real world, that's not how it works.
Councillor Cameron.
Yeah, just a couple of comments to make. I mean, we're in this position because we're being accused of underfunding infrastructure because of political decision making. So sure, we can cut anything we want, but is that the financially prudent thing to do in the long term? I'd suggest not. So the government's direction is we can't underfund infrastructure, but we've just got to find other ways. And we've also got to remember the difference between operational expenditure and its impact on rates. It's immediate. So the day-to-day costs of running the council is immediate impact on rates, and our capital expenditure, which is the infrastructure projects and the biggest projects that are debt funded, the cost of that is spread over a longer period of time. So that's sort of where our bandwidth is, I suppose, when we're looking at infrastructure. How long do we have our debt funding going for to spread it over the cost of 50 years instead of immediately on immediate ratepayers? So understanding that difference, OPEX, immediate effect on rates, CAPEX over a longer period of time, and generally debt funded.
Sorry, just commenting on that, Councillor Cameron. We as a sector, Taupō fed back to the rates cap submission, I guess, and as part of that was in relation to depreciation funding, and again, financial prudence, links back to that depreciation funding and making sure you replace what you've got. And I think there was a question to central government to answer, and what piece of legislation comes first, or are we looking at changing that legislation? However, I guess the exclusion of waters is saying, look, that's excluded because we know we've got to provide safe drinking waters under the new standards, so that's excluded. But for the rest of council, I guess that's why we're suggesting some of those things like asset sales and rationalisation, as to, well, actually, are we replacing the assets? And then you're having these level of service conversations. So are we providing the same level of service? That's kind of why we wanted to start here, because it is directly related to the things that you guys have to progress with the community coming along the journey as well.
So, Sarah, for me, depreciation is a big cost. So when you revalue those assets, are they generally going up in value or down in value?
So that's been the challenge over the last few years. So significant increases in the values, which have driven depreciation higher. I mean, we have still done level of service projects, and level of service projects aren't always just because we want to do them, but legislation's changed, right? So we're offering now, particularly in that water space, an increased level of service on those assets. So some of it's to do with the new assets built, some of it's to do with growth assets, because we have to provide for a larger district, but a lot of it, the depreciation increases, has been directly related to infrastructure construction and subsequently revaluation. So yeah, that's been a massive cost driver. Again, if we have a look over the last few years from a depreciation perspective, and you can just compare even annual report to annual report, depreciation has gone up millions. I think actually Aidan had figures, and he's like, he's like, don't talk to no. And I think it had gone up from 22 million to 40 million over 5 years. So that's 20 million of rates. So essentially it's about 20% on rates over 5 years.
That comes back to inflationary pressures too, and the cost of building said infrastructure.
Yeah, just in the calculation of your assets value though, it's not on a decreasing value, you revalue it. So like if you just spend 10 million on a new plant somewhere, in my world every year its value would decrease. Yeah. But it's not the way you do it here.
No, so the remaining life is taken into account as well as the asset value, and again, in order to fund those assets from the right generation that's using them, or again, it's to do with that intergenerational equity component. However, where it does get complicated, if you've depreciated an asset down to, say an asset's got a 20-year life and you've depreciated it 10 years, and then the value increases massively. For the next year, we make sure we depreciate it right, but we don't go back and look at that last 10 years. So our depreciation reserves and renewals also have been under a significant pressure. So it's not just actually depreciation funding and the funding of those renewals, but it's actually put more pressure on our other mechanisms as well, such as debt.
Are there any other questions? I got the message, Steve. We're going to break for lunch.
What time would you like to be back?
Sorry?
What time would you like to be back for the
Half an hour. Everyone okay? Half an hour for lunch? We'll make it 1:15. get underway. Sorry, Tony. Is this recorded? Yes, it is. Okay, welcome back into the continuation of the long-term plan.
Oh, kia ora anō, councillors. So thank you for being here again this afternoon. I agree, it is still cold here in Taupō today, but hopefully we're getting out the other end of that cold snap. Look, this time we have Kendall and Aidan. We're going to start a process of looking at our high-level strategic review of activities. Welcome to all my awesome team that are in the audience today to be able to support you with this. I know you're all passionate about the work that you do and are here to answer councillors' questions. I'm now going to hand over to Kendall and Aidan because this afternoon is going to be up and about and talking. So thank you. Thanks to everyone that's here and thanks to both Aidan and Kendall.
Just push your mic button, Kendall, if you...
Right. Hopefully this works. I'm not sure what's going on.
Is your screen extended or is it duplicated?
It's probably duplicated. It worked last time perfectly. Right. I'm going to increase the size of that. Hello again. So, as I said this morning, I just wanted to quickly just cover off the workshops going forward so that you could understand the different activity areas that are going to be coming up. So, 3rd of March today, we've got libraries, Taupō Museum and Art Gallery, community engagement. Oh, it's not working again. There we go. Community halls and the airport. Those will be the activities for today. As we go forward, we've got pools, strategic property. That also includes forestry holdings as well, the housing for the elderly and waste and environmental management. The waters, we've put the waters all on the same day, given the commonalities with those ones. Then we move into transport, emergency management, animal control and compliance, parks and reserves, policy and planning, cemeteries. What's up there? Then we've got the council-controlled organisations, events and venues. And then we come at the end of the month, we'll be doing a bit of a combined one of our community leadership groups and internal ones such as finance, communications and things like that. And that's also, there's also a wrap-up session booked in there too, which is where if there's something we can't sort out today or any of the other workshops, we'll note it down and make sure that we come back to it as a point and revisit that. And then also, which isn't showing up here, but we will be having a strategic projects workshop as well. So that's a chance for us to really do a deep dive into things such as the track, the Turangi Recreational Activity Centre that has been in the long-term plan for a number of years and where we're going with that, and any other sort of big strategic project which might also come out of your ideas today as you're flushing out working through activities as well. So we'll kind of put them into a bit of a parking lot and make sure that we get to do a deep dive and look at that detail as much as you like. So that's kind of the future of the next month. There is going to be a lot of work, so please let us know if there is any more information we can get to you to help make these more informative for you and more valuable. We do not want to waste your time. And also, just if you do need any breaks or anything like that, please let us know. So we're not trying to get you to do too much at once. So yeah, but I will hand over to Aidan, who's going to do a quick Briefing of the network infrastructure objectives.
Okay, you've all been provided this ahead of time, but I'd quickly like to run through it. So one of the biggest pieces of work we have to do for the LTP is our network asset management planning. That's about identifying the investment needs for the next 30 years. And our network infrastructure is transport plus our 3 waters. So this is what was previously covered by Council's infrastructure strategy, which is a 30-year view and underpins each LTP. This year it will actually be split in 2, which is kind of awkward. We'll have a 30-year water service services strategy covering just waters, and the infrastructure strategy will be left over only covering transport. So it doesn't make that much sense, but that is the current legislative requirement until at least they sort of clean the act up. So what I'm hoping to do today is confirm the objectives that we sent out to you. I'll talk a little bit about the bottom before we get into them. At the bottom, there are a bunch of sort of major infrastructure challenges and future decisions. Again, these are historic. These were the ones that we signalled in the 24 infrastructure strategy. Again, these are things we think we'll probably have to update the community on as part of this LTP, where there's still live projects. But no doubt we'll be adding to this list, both through the scoping activities that we'll be doing later today and throughout the month. But as people do their planning, they'll be identifying the large challenges that we face. So we'll be adding to that list over time. But today I really want us to focus on the objectives, because this is the sort of thing that underpins how they do their planning and their assessment. So what I'm hoping is that you'll go, yes, those objectives make sense. These are indeed the things that we should be aiming to achieve through our planning. It should be worth noting that we might not be able to deliver on all these necessarily. As we come back to it, we'll have to apply a financial lens and a deliverability lens, looking at what we can actually deliver and what we can afford. But for the purpose of planning, we should understand what it would take to meet these objectives, and if we compromise, it will be based on a knowledge of what we should have done. So that's the intent of these objectives. They will guide our planning for our core infrastructure, and we might have to revise them as part of the final LTP, depending on what our investment plan is and what we can afford. Is that clear before I move on? Right, you want to bring them up for me? So I'm just going to run through them, and I'm hoping for sort of nods and agreement or any discussion or questions as we go. There are just 4. And the first one is that assets are well looked after and maintained in good condition for current and future generations. Comfort that that's an appropriate objective for our infrastructure planning. Okay. The next one is that we're planning and investing to support population growth and housing development. Again, this is one that we probably don't have a lot of choice around. There's a lot of regulatory requirements in this space. But again, we need to understand what growth we're expecting, and you've already had a session on sort of our growth assumptions, and we need to understand what infrastructure we need to put in place to service that growth. So that's the purpose of that objective. Comfort with that one too? Okay. We're humming through, this is great. Number 3, we are maintaining levels of service and improving public health and environmental outcomes. Again, for the purpose of planning, we assume that we're able to maintain levels of service. Once we come to the decision-making phase and we're having to prioritise and look at affordability, we may have to compromise on these, but we're hoping to plan on this basis. So I think the numbering was a bit skew off on yours, but there's 3 and then there's A to G underneath, which give a little bit more detail on what our sort of current service levels are that we plan for.
So through the chair, I've got A and B and then 4.
Yeah. all those should be sub-points under 3. Okay. Sorry about that. And what you have there is 8 is actually the 4th one.
So just a quick comment on 3A then. Sorry.
Yes.
Excuse me, 3B. Totally agree. However, you point in brackets, including maintaining Lake Taupō nitrogen reductions. By implication, putting that attached to wastewater and stormwater, is that's where the nitrogen's coming from. And it's not, arguably not. A lot of that is from other sources.
Look, you're absolutely correct. We are a contributing factor, but we're a reasonably small one. We have a long-standing position where we've aimed to reduce our share, which is quite a small share of that pie by some level. And that is sort of a standard that we have imposed upon ourselves as a council, or we have agreed historically through different mechanisms. And while it's not a regulatory impact on us, it is a long-standing position that we're playing for.
Excuse me, I get all that and have no argument with that at all. And given that the Lake Taupō Protection Trust is now in-house with us, I just wonder, simply by focusing on wastewater and stormwater, we are not going to impact the nitrogen reductions because there are bigger impacts here, and I just wonder whether that's appropriately worded. That's my only comment there. That's all.
I think to the point around what we discharge to land out at Broadlands Road, it does have a fairly sizable impact with the pumice country.
Sorry, I'm just looking at Aidan because I don't want to put my foot in it, but we do have to have some time coming up during the LTP process to talk about new wastewater standards. Can I suggest maybe, Aidan, at this point, we perhaps take that wording out and then the brackets out, and then post we've had some time looking at wastewater standards, we can decide whether it's appropriate to bring back or not. Is that a way forward?
Okay, so just a question over here. I'm glad you pointed out the points because I was wondering why local iwi and hapu providers and Māori Worldview were under 7 transport. So it's just another point, yep. But I wondered what was the consideration of why maintaining levels of service is lumped in there with public health and environmental outcomes.
It doesn't need to be, but in the context of the LTP, there's typically 3 categories that we break things down into. There's your renewals component, there's your growth component, and then your levels of service, which is quite a large catch-all. We could absolutely break that up if you'd like to make some sort of distinction, but that's the only reason it's there. We've got 4 parts to our infrastructure strategy, and we cover a lot of those things together, and a lot of the public health and environmental requirements are essential levels of service in terms of the investment we're making and the way the LTP is framed up. So that's why they're kind of grouped together.
Yeah, why I ask is because that environmental outcomes, I would have thought would sit better in planning for the future sort of things and looking that way. I can kind of see what with the points you've pulled out there, but it just means I just want to make sure we're getting it right and that we are considering the environmental impacts appropriately, and it's not just lumped in because that's our things we have to look at with the new standards. We're actually looking at our impact on the environment and how it influences the future.
I think I understand what you're saying, and there's not a hierarchy in these. So when we're planning for growth, we have to do it in a way that still meets the levels of service and the environmental requirements that we're seeking to plan. So the two do absolutely go together. I think I agree with you. Is that any other questions on the third sort of objective before we move on to the last one? Okay, and then the last one is that we are managing natural hazard risks to ensure that our infrastructure is resilient. And this was a particular focus last LTP in 2024, and we developed a whole chapter around this, looking at understanding what are the risks we face and what are our investment needs to improve that, ensure that we are in a good position in that space. So those are our 4 core planning objectives at this point, and if you're happy with that, we'll sort of lock those in. That will be the basis on which we do our asset management planning for our network infrastructure. We'll also have early engagement with iwi on these principles and see if they have any input as well before we do all our planning.
Sorry, just one more point on that last point. You've got identifying the critical assets and impacts of climate change, but you don't actually have anything there about the risk around our current environment. So things like the geothermal down at Tukanu. So actually
That's right.
taking note of that.
There's a whole bunch of risks that are beyond what is put there. Those are
Okay.
just, they're includes, they're not supposed to be an exclusive list. But natural hazard risks is a broad category, absolutely, not just climate change risks, all the hazards we face, earthquakes, volcano, landslides, everything, yeah. All right, thank you for that. That's an important one. That is the basis on which we do quite a lot of planning, and we thought it was sensible that you at least got an understanding of the framework we sort of use for that planning and the opportunity to input into it. We'll also use that for some early engagement with iwi to make sure that they understand this is the framework we'll use for our planning, and they can have a say before we turn up with all our planning. So the next one, we're getting into the exciting bit, which is where we stop talking and you guys start doing the work. So I'll quickly outline the process.
I'm going to interrupt, Aidan, I'm sorry. You've said earlier on that waters is excluded, but then you've got down here water meters and charging. But you've got up the top that water is excluded.
So waters is excluded from the infrastructure strategy, but it has its own strategy, which essentially follows the same type of process. So we still have our asset management planning for all our waters, we still do all our planning. These are still the objectives we will use to underpin our water planning, just as for transport. At the end of the day, they will be in two separate documents, but following broadly the same themes and structure, I imagine. Yeah, it is a bit of a mess, that change. Yes, sorry about that.
Sorry, that strategy Aidan's referring to is the water services strategy. So we have a water services strategy and a long-term plan.
All right, the task today. This is hopefully the opportunity you've been waiting for. Through this series of workshops, we'll be canvassing every activity that council does, and we'll be canvassing everything council spends money on. You've already been primed earlier today through the financial strategy overview that we've got some serious challenges in the space, and we're going to have to go through everything quite carefully to think how we're going to manage cost increases in a rates cap world. So you'll have the opportunity to ask questions and really set the direction for options you would like explored or questions you would like answered through the planning process. So we're doing it now so that while we plan, we can consider what your direction is, what questions you want answered, and hopefully come back to you with some good options and advice. I'll give some quick direction and then we'll get into it. So what we're going to do is we're going to split you into two groups. We'll go right down the middle, right and left. The left will go to the left wall, where they're first off they'll be talking community engagement, development and iwi engagement. The right will go to the right. You've already been given the information in the middle, which is about each activity. This was intended to provide sort of an understanding of the scale and scope of the activity, some of the challenges they face both now and looking ahead a couple of years, what it costs, but also, and this is probably the focus of the workshop, what sort of options there might be if you want to review the sort of service level to cost trade-off and options that we have. So first, you'll head to the first colourful poster, which has some quadrants in it. You'll take a little red dot and you'll place it where you think that should go. And we have high and low importance to the community, running top to bottom, and then left to right, low and high, how satisfied is the community with this, how well are we doing? And this is just a basic prioritisation tool. So if we come to it and we're struggling to understand or determine which one we should focus on, we might come back to this chart and think about, well, how important is it relative to the other, and how well do we think we're doing? After that, we'll have the experts in the room sitting by the poster, and you can ask them any questions you have about the activity, how it works, how well it's used, any questions about the cost, and particularly again about those options. What options do we have and choices do we have for doing things differently? After that, you'll put a little vote on the next poster along. There's 4 options there, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 is you think this activity is set about right. So that's a space where we're happy with the services we provide. We want to continue to provide those probably as efficiently as possible and managing costs within a rates cap environment, but we're not specifically looking to save money here, and we're probably not also looking for options to improve services. So that's sort of a status quo support. And then 2, that's options we want to explore and see more options for how could we reduce our investment in these areas and accept some service level trade-offs. Number 3 is the opposite. That's where you think there's value money left on the table, and actually we should be doing more in this space. And the 4th one at the bottom, that is where you want to deep dive maybe into the activity as a whole. Maybe you want to look at doing things completely differently. Could we move from services in person to online? Could we partner or outsource with somebody else? Or could we look at what are our options for ceasing providing the service altogether? So we're going to get you to put a little stake in the sand on where you think we're at in terms of this. And then on the final sheet, you've got the options to put on a little post-it. Any questions you have that you'd like answered throughout the planning process. So any particular matters, ideas or projects or questions you have, we can put on there. The sort of thing I have in mind is you might have a local park that's sort of run down and you're getting questions about it, and you might like to know what is the plan for renewal of that asset. Are there plans, is there money set aside to replace it in the near future, or are we likely to give it up? What is the future of that asset? So those are the sorts of questions you might have in that space. And then in the bottom corner on that side is about early engagement. And we can either do that now, or we will review and wrap up again at the end. This is about, are there any questions we'd like to test with the community early around this? Early engagement's not compulsory, but it is an opportunity to either get community input early to inform sort of the optioneering and the assessment of options, or to give the community time to digest, particularly where council's considering maybe significant changes. And even where council might not have a lot of choice and the community might not have a lot of choice about what's coming, but at least give them some time to digest and get used to that. So to do all that, I'm going to give you 15 minutes, and then we're going to swap sides and you're going to do the other activity, and then we'll come back as a group and see if there's any sort of consensus or direction we can reach at this point that will guide our planning. Today we're covering about a quarter of our 23 activities to set some sort of scale of what we can aim for. I think we could probably aim to do decent reviews, service level reviews, of maybe 5 activities, maybe a quarter out of those 23. And the reason for that is, look, we've got a limited time to do all our planning. You have to make all your decisions by the end of the year. The teams need to do all their planning, budgeting, options analysis and advice, all while trying to provide seamless services to the community. So we cannot review every council activity. To do it properly and provide decent advice and real choices and options, I think we need to be strategic and targeted. So that's what we're hoping you can do today. And also, as you've seen today, we can't review none of them either. We're going to face cost challenges, and you're going to know what your options are for meeting those. And if there are any areas where you want to do more, you're going to have to identify areas where the money might come from to do that too. So that's the challenge, strategic and targeted, 5 areas that you want to review and be quite specific. That's our challenge for today. There'll be staff around the room if you've got any questions as we go. Otherwise, we'll divvy up and begin unless you've got any questions.
So Aidan, just the question was, how does this work from a live streaming perspective, which was the question I asked yesterday, Kendall. So the intention is for the live streaming to pause while you move away from the room to be able to have that 15-minute conversation. When you come back and report back, that's when the live stream will come back on again, so that we can keep the public informed about the conversations, but it really doesn't work while you're moving around the room. So to anybody that's watching, there will be a little pause while we do that. And also just acknowledging Councillor Woodward. We'll have to think of a way of getting your input too from online. I appreciate you're unwell at the moment, so just acknowledging you.
Oh, thank you so much.
We'll try and keep
All right, I think we're back. Thank you very much for participating in that first round. I suppose just one point to make. Council has something like 40 different activities. We do a lot, and if we did every single one individually, we would be here for a long, long time. So we have tried to group them, as we've said in that the LTP guidebook. We have distilled them into 23 groups, which will still allow you to have the conversations and cover all of them. So yeah, these were the first two that we did. Up next is community halls and libraries, but before we track onto that, Aidan was just going to do some wrap up.
Yeah, so the hope at the moment is that we can track some sort of position and see if there's some sort of consensus or overview common themes coming forward at this point in time. We have a little tracking sheet so we can keep track of how we're heading. Again, with the idea of maybe a quarter of these we can review. And already I can see that we might be getting into some trouble. But let's look at community engagement and development and iwi engagement first. There seems to be some consensus that this is of high importance to the community, with a range in how well we are delivering that, how satisfied the community is with that. And then the next red dots is the one we want to focus on. Is this an area we want to review or not? And there seems to be a split between looking at reviewing it with an eye to reducing service levels and saving money versus a complete overhaul or a deeper dive into how can we do this completely differently. Does anybody want to talk to what they were thinking in that space now that we're here as a group?
I will.
I'm happy to comment.
I felt that it was a lot bundled into one. I think the really difficult thing with relationships, community and engagement is we don't always appreciate the work that goes into these things and the actual outcome that comes from these things, and they're not tangible, they're not measurable. It's a really difficult quantum to deal with. However, we've got some really challenging and tricky conversations coming up with legislation change amongst everything else that's going on in the world at the moment. And if we don't have those relationships and that engagement developed from the get-go, people will cease wanting to see us if we only turn up when we've got something to ask or a favour to ask, rather than having that genuine engagement on a genuine level. And I feel like our direction of travel currently as a council is really establishing those sound relationships across the board. Look, I understand that we're under a monetary focus, and so the community funding and things like that, that's really important too. And I think we've only just changed our strategy there and embedding the new concepts that have been developed. Like, we haven't had a chance to see what's come out of the different ways that we've put the community funding together to see what opportunities come out of that. So while I'd like to look at reviewing some stuff, but it's a big basket that's sitting there in front of us. There's some stuff that we're yet to see the success metrics of. There's some stuff going really well that's putting us in a really good position for the future. And then it's the big question of, should council be doing this or shouldn't they be doing it? So yeah, a lot rolled in.
Well, it might be me, through the chair. My thoughts are that given we're going into a rates cap environment, we may not necessarily have to reduce level of services just yet. So continuing that investment in the community development team should lead to building capability for some of our community groups and charities, because quite frankly, when we have to stop providing some of those things, we need people to pick up that slack. So I'd like to see a bit of help building, which is the grants and partnerships direction we've given, building capability to community groups and charities to build up their capability to perhaps fill in some of those gaps.
Yep, I agree with Kylie and with Rachel. I think I've said it quite a few times now. I think engagement and partnership with our people across the communities is super important. I feel like in these trying times at the moment where the environment is so murky, that direct investment into the capability of our council staff, but also our councillors to actually be able to frontline some of those conversations, because I've been on the receiving end of engagement in terms of being a community member and a hapu member representing that group, and I know just how much time and effort is required when you're fostering meaningful engagement. Relationships is the key to everything. Relationships is the key to trust. And we've seen the other scale of when our community have lost faith in this council, and we hear it each time we get to an election period. All of that concern is brought to light, and I think I wouldn't want to see any decrease in expenditure in this area. In fact, I would prefer to see an increase if we're going to move the scale, or just maintain a solid level of investment into our engagements in particular.
I suppose me. I actually find it slightly offensive that iwi engagement is even grouped in with community engagement. It's there as in we have to do that with our iwi partners. If anything, it could be that there is the general hapu engagement at that level on those, but when it comes to iwi engagement and working with our partners, that's a totally different conversation, and the amount of do less bullets in there was worrying to see that a lot of those were actually in that space.
I think, just to clarify some of my thinking around that, Ngāhuia, it wasn't around that, it was around like the 700k of community funding, so the grants, so there's a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Councillor Taylor.
So I picked a middle ground on that. So if you look at the options we're given, it's do the same, do less, cost less, do more, cost more, throw it out completely, or do something completely different. My preference would be have a look at what is working really well, amplify that, and look at things where there are areas to improve and improve them. And it doesn't necessarily have to cost less, cost more, or whatever, but that's why I've put that comment in there. And if you reflect back on community satisfaction and the importance, most of us have got this as very high, so it's a significant issue for the community. But there's always areas to improve, like all of our service delivery. So that's kind of the rationale behind where I went with it.
Councillor Mood.
Sorry. Just another thing, I noted the amount of staff members that we have who are dedicating their time to engagement. 14 across the whole rohe is absolutely ridiculous, let me tell you, especially if those 14 staff are made to engage with each marae across the entire rohe, each hapu across the entire rohe, and that's not even taking into account the different wards across the whole rohe. I think they are incredibly stretched with the resources that they have, and I would like to see more capacity provided to that team in terms of engagement, because if we don't engage in good faith, we risk eroding trust, we risk reputation in terms of council and how well we communicate and engage with our community. So I just think more.
Councillor Mananui.
I think just understand that there's a lot to cover to fit in under this topic, and just sort of how we've grouped them, or here especially, and it's going to come, or there'll be more of it. I think I'm just getting a feel for the scalability, I guess, of what we're trying to do, because I can see us getting to the end of this having very similar looking plot graphs and a spread of what we should do. I think it's the in and amongst us trying to figure out where we sit or what we think. We've all got little or different ideas in and around what the go forward is for staff. So I'm just sort of highlighting that, and this is the first two areas we're looking at. Possibly once we get into it and maybe things become a little clearer of where we need to sit in certain areas, as in, is the status quo okay? I sort of sat on the fence a little bit with Kevin in and around, is there another option? And it really, though, it depends what the cost is around some analysis, because ultimately that's a thing here. So yeah, I guess I'm saying be good to, even at the end of today, just leave these somewhere where we can go back in case we change our view or our own scalability, I guess, as we work through this process.
Yes, you're right. We can't lose the fact that we've got to manage the costs, and we can do a lot of things. We don't have to work to a tight budget. Councillor Greenslade.
Thank you, Worship. I pretty much agree with most of what other councillors have said, although when we're talking about community engagement, we have to take into account that we have now got a new process in place for community engagement. We're going to have our Community Connect groups, we've still got our representative groups in place, and I think that you will find as time goes forward, as Councillor Mitch said, yes, we've only got 14 staff, but you might find that actually a lot more is being fed through from the community because there's going to be a wider spread across the community of people connecting that perhaps wasn't there before. I do have to say though, that particular group does a huge job, and I think when you look on the wall there to see what areas they cover, it was quite overwhelming to look and say, well, goodness gracious me, you know, how can they do less? That in itself is a difficult one when you're talking about relationship building. But I do think you've got to be careful that you don't end up in a situation that's grown like Topsy. Just because we've done it, that's all what we always keep on doing. So a long, hard look at every little thing, just a light look over, but keeping in mind that we have got a new process for engagement going forward. We maybe need to take that into account as well.
And just probably the last comment from me on this one is just how we fund certain things as well, like even the grants and partnerships. Can we look at alternative ways of funding that? It might be that we can find a way to fund some of these things without it impacting rates, so we can sort of, I've used this so many times, you have our cake and eat it too, because I want to enable our communities, but I also recognise we've got a really difficult situation coming up with rates capping. So I think we need to use the time now to be really strategic in how we're going to approach things going forward. And I do think that there are different ways that we can look to fund some of these nice to haves, I guess you might call them. TEL fund, perhaps, you know, the housing investment, the money that we get from our property could be used a different way to be able to fund some of these more community-minded events, because eventually we won't be able to do this under a rates cap. So we just need to use this time now to be really strategic about how we might be able to carry on for as long as we possibly can without it affecting rates.
I'm conscious that these are just the first two activities we've covered out of a bunch. Brilliant discussion though, that is the whole point of this exercise, and for you to give us some good direction. So I think we'll pencil in the results as they stand, but a lot of your comments will talk to why you chose those and what you mean when you're thinking about a fundamental review. So we'll pencil them in and we'll come back at the wrap-up session to make sure that we have the right number across the board. But we will quickly touch on airport for a few minutes before we bring up the next set. There seems to be a bit of a split again between keep the status quo or do a more in-depth review of particular areas. Again, if there's anything anyone would like to broach on, in particular what they would like to review in that bottom area, that would be helpful, I think.
I think the point that we brought up, there was a comment earlier today about events and the impact of events through people's experiences, that you can spend whatever you want on advertising and doing the likes, but it's actually a person's human experience that shares far and wide, and that has a massive impact. So to the point of the airport, we're starting to see a number of international people coming in, and their experience at that airport will ricochet beyond any advertising that we might be able to do for the district. To the point we're starting to see some very wealthy people arriving in Taupō, and that experience there will speak wider than us ever being able to actually get in contact directly with those people with any level of advertising or anything like that. So I just think it's how can we learn from what we do well as a district and what has had positive impact on our district, and then how do we leverage that across the other key components that are part of our long-term plan. So the example would be the airport in this one. So you've got an international visitor arriving via private means, and how they feel when they get here and the response that they get, will, that instant, your first impression in 30 seconds is the lasting impression, and that's the gateway to our district for a number of our visitors.
Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, just speaking as a member of the airport committee, I think at the moment, the airport's fine, but it's really what we should be focusing on, I think we will be focusing on, is developing income from anything apart from aviation, because at the moment we're kind of heavily reliant on one airline, Air New Zealand, and they're here now, and we certainly want them to stay, but we're in a kind of a risky situation that if they did choose to depart, we would be not in a very good situation. So I think it would be, it's utterly in our interest and healthy to be focusing on alternative income streams in the airport grounds anyway.
Exactly what I was about to say. We do need to look at our income streams. I agree with you, Duncan. Take note. And we also need to decide what it is we want from our airport as well. Like, is it a regional airport? We just look after ourselves and we just make sure that it's fit for purpose for our community, or do we advance that into a broader business case? So I'm looking at the leasing, given that that's my background, and whether or not we want to encourage some of these wealthy jet owners to come and land here and park their jet and potentially lease a nice hangar while they're at it. And I think there's potential there, and it's something that I'd like to see us look into.
Can I just say that the competition is actually the motor vehicle, and they're improving roads. And Air New Zealand have repairs, looks like they're going to hang in here, but the schedule could change. So there's a number of people now driving, but the flights are still doing very well. But the road will improve, time will reduce.
Okay, we've got our next set.
I'll make a little comment before we go. I'd like to thank Wayne for coming along and being in the room and being there to answer some questions, and a couple of things that we know, real basic stuff like airport parking has stopped the cafe going ahead because no one's going to go up there and pay to park so that they can have a cup of coffee. So those sorts of things, RV parking, things like that, real basic stuff that Wayne says that they are now looking at, and I think that'll make a difference to just the people of Taupō, for instance, never mind the airport itself, which is clearly in good hands.
It's a vote for you, Wayne. But the parking does contribute to the airport overheads.
Okay, we'll divide up again. Same approach as last time, same teams. This is number 2 and number 3 and number 4 of our 6 today. It might go faster now that we know how it all works. We'll keep an eye on that, and we'll keep things moving. So again, have your say. Thank you.
So I hope we'll be going offline for 15-30 minutes. So Aidan, we're ready when you are.
Okay, thank you again for your participation. Again, we'll come back, we'll have a quick group discussion before we get into the last two. Again, we're just looking for, is there a common steer that we can use now, and we'll pencil it in. Obviously, we can review that once we've done them all. But at the moment for libraries, it looks like we're penciling in a consensus around the status quo. We're happy with the current level of services. Obviously, we'll still have to look for cost savings and cost efficiencies under a rates cap environment, but broadly, we're not looking for particular review of cuts. That seems to be the message coming forward. Any discussion? Appreciate that.
Yes, through the chair. I'm dissatisfied with the service in that we just don't have libraries open on Sundays. I think that's a real shortcoming, and I believe they've never been open Sundays here. A lot of libraries, many other cities and places I've been to, have libraries open on Sundays, and that's when a lot of people can actually make it to a library. I think it should be seriously considered to, if we wanted costs to stay the same, just or similar, close it on a 1 weekday would be better. It would obviously cost more to keep the existing level of service and have open Sundays, but I'd be interested to know what that cost would be, and I haven't kept up with it lately. If we still have late evening Thursdays open, I'm not. Can you answer me that question? Do we still have that? No. Oh, we don't. Well, yeah, I think that's. Oh, we need to get that back. So I'm dissatisfied with the service.
Councillor Campbell, were you the councillor that wanted to reduce rates or increase them?
Oh no, through the chair. If we need to close a weekday to open a Sunday, yeah, no. You go to the library on the middle of a weekday. There's not many people in there, but I guarantee you had that place open on a Sunday, and it would be pretty popular.
Just as a note, I was talking before to Steve and Louisa. I was going to call you Teresa. And I was actually quite pleased to learn that the government funds some of the online and tech facilities like Wi-Fi and things like that. So right now it's all very workable, but we have to we'll have to do what we can to try and maintain that level of government funding. Yeah, but I was really pleased to learn that, and I just thought it might be interesting for everyone else to know that as well.
Wayne.
Yeah, I was pleased to kind of hear that the library is not even just a library for our community. We actually have quite a lot of activity that goes on in our library, including it pretty much being an informal, unnamed hub. So I suppose it would be really good to leverage off that and maybe see how that can further develop out into more of an overall hub. I mean, we have people who go there and use the computers to study. We have schools who come in regularly. We have lots of things that go on at a library, and it's not just a place that people go to read books. So maybe it's there's an opportunity there for us just to see how we could kind of maybe try and develop that hub idea for our library and kind of improve it.
Supplementary to that, if that's our direction of travel, then do we need to consider the library as something else rather than just a library? Because when we talk to our community as a populace and they assume that these costs are just for a library and just for books, when that's not what it is at all. The meeting rooms I've seen used for multiple purposes, from environmental stuff through to genealogy, through to, the school's burnt down and the kids are meeting together to do some learning. But I think when we refer to it just as a library, it narrows our view. So maybe it's just an internal challenge of what we do there.
Councillor Foreman.
want to support that train of thought, because that's where I struggled with the libraries one, is that I see it as a library when in multiple other communities I've had the chance to go into their libraries. It's not a library, it is an actual hub, and it's got way more activities included. So for us to be able to do that here would actually be quite a big infrastructure cost. So it's whether or not we need to have a look at that in the long-term future.
Thank you. Now, who we got? Anyone else? Aidan, do you want to carry on?
Okay, moving to community halls. Again, there seems to be a bit of a steer in there along the lines of number 2, which is consider options for maybe rationalisation and cost savings in that space, or 4, which is again a deeper dive into how we provide this service. Any discussions around that, or is that a reasonable steer to pencil in?
I'm going to throw the challenge out there to consider each sub-community quite differently. One example being the Whakamaru Hall. I mean, that entered in quite a sad state of disrepair when you compare that to the Tauranga Hall or the River Road Hall, for example, but also their level of use, but also the community willingness to look after their community asset. You know, the Tauranga Hall is used, for example, at least weekly, if not more frequently. You know, I was out there last Thursday night, you know, the whole hall was cleaned before everybody left and everyone just mucked in and the job was done, sort of thing. Versus other places you don't see that, versus River Road, I know that they gather on a Sunday afternoon at about 4 o'clock, and they've done that since COVID. So I don't think we can all treat all of them as apples with apples. It's apples and oranges and pears, and just making sure that what's fit for one community might be different to another. And then where that lines up, like I'm not sure how the Marotiri Hall fits in there, because it sits on the school property and is kind of used by the school but used by the community, and I don't even know who owns that hall, for example. That's a real quagmire. So yeah, I just think it's it would really, I don't think we could have a one rule across the district. I think we need to break that down.
Councillor Delator.
Yes, in a similar vein or line, I suppose. But just Wairoa House being on that same grid, I found a little challenging in that very, very different asset and community asset, I suppose, for people compared to the community halls, which are, you know, similar. But I agree with Councillor Leonard, need to be considered independently when we talk further about it. But yeah, so some of the stickers have got Wairoa House written on them because, yeah, very important and doing a great job. And then other stickers are more in relation to the community halls because, yeah, quite different.
Through the chair, yes, I agree with the rationalisation approach, because if we consider the cost of owning these facilities, it's repairs and maintenance, it's funding depreciation and all those sorts of costs we just don't need across all of the district. There are some we can absolutely do away with and reduce some significant operating expenditure, which we know goes directly to rates.
Councillor Greenslade.
Thank you, Worship. We've got a particular challenge in Turangi because since the, 2021 long-term plan, the Turangi Recreation Centre was being promised. So, of course, there's been no work, maintenance or anything done either on our gym or our hall. And I see that that's been sort of put into the pile of this discussion. So, for the Turangi community, I'm not quite sure where that leaves us. We've had no support, no maintenance, and yet we've got something that's being challenged in this. So I think it's going to be a little hard conversation for us, those of us who are involved in Turangi.
Councillor Leonard.
Just in regards to this, is sometimes the unintended consequences of some of the decisions that we might make. I was just thinking back to the Whakamaru Hall, you know, that the play centre aligns on the same premise. So a decision that we make for a hall and then the unintended consequences that that could have on a community. The same as down in Kuratau, you know, the play centre has operated out of there and playgroups have operated out of there, so it's not just the hall as a community facility, but what else kind of gets used in amongst that. And I think just also considering too the well-being of our rural communities, when we've already perhaps depreciated these assets and a lot of those costs have gone, at the risk of, I mean, I'm not wanting to promote rural pubs, but they were a hub of the community and a lot of those have gone now. So the opportunity for people to come and gather in places has been restricted a great deal due to those sorts of things occurring. I look to the example of Repuroa, a staff member of the council, her mum and a group of people got together and they've transformed that hall from just about being a demolition job to what it is today. It's quite invigorating, and what they did for Anzac Day, it became a really beautiful thing. If we let communities know what's at risk, where they might step up, maybe.
Yeah, and I've got to say, updated my little chitty on the board there 5 minutes ago. It would have to be, if we were looking at, it should be hall by hall. You'd look at the Acacia Bay Community Hall, well run, well used, reasonably modern. Whakamaru, some issues with maintenance, who owns the land and all of that. So if we were moving in that direction, it would certainly be case by case.
Okay, thanks for that. You want to brief us on the next one, Ed?
Just thank you for the discussion. That's a key point. Part of this is giving us a steer on where we need to do a lot more work if we are going to review an area. It's not a straightforward decision. There's a lot of work that's got to go in to assess these options, which is why we're trying to be strategic and targeted and pick a reasonable number that we can do that work properly. So thank you. That's really good feedback. We're into our final two. Same process. Off you go.
Hope, are you back online?
Yeah.
Thanks, Lee.
Okay, we're coming to the end of the day, which is good. We'll try and cover these last two, and hopefully we can finish earlier than planned. Taupō Museum and Art Gallery, again, if I'm looking at the board, we're mostly in the green space of it's important to the community, but we're doing a reasonable job with the facilities we've got. But if I look at the red dots for where should we be going forward, there's a lot in the, let's do a bit of a deep dive into this. It'd be useful if you all sort of shout out what it is you wanted to deep dive into in that space. Give us some more direction on what that means.
Who's going first?
Just waiting
John?
for direction from the chair.
Yes, Rachel.
You're first then, Rachel. That's the direction from the chair. It's your turn.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you. What I was discussing with Louisa actually was that there are currently some third-party funding options whereby MB Century and Contact are helping with bringing some of the exhibitions and exhibits to the museum, and I'd like to see us look a bit more into those possibilities, because it's the day-to-day stuff that is the most impactful, but it's also the day-to-day stuff that has an impact on rates.
Councillor Kylie.
Thank you. This is just something I'd like us to consider. In 24, I went to the Picasso Museum in Paris with a German gentleman, and that led to a conversation. He said, "How do you feel about Picasso?" I said, "I never really thought that much of it, to be fair, but after today I feel a little bit different because you walked alongside me." He said his experience of World War II was one of the first things that they did to get control of the minds of their people was they took away their arts. And the impact of that on community is ongoing and massive for the entire world. So just when we think about this, it's not just about nuts and bolts, but it's actually the impact on the entire community. So if we take away the arts and that ability to think differently, to see differently, to experience differently, then what impacts do we have on our community? And I'm not an art person. I don't have those creative bones in my body, and it wasn't until he said those words to me that I really understood that I needed to take my thinking outside of the box. So that's just a challenge I'd lay to everybody at the table.
Councillor Murch.
Yeah, I had a quite a good discussion with Steve, one of the council staff, on this topic, more so around the museum and the arts as a whole across the district. I think the community could probably use or do with a bit of a culture shift in the way that we view art, in the way that we receive it, in the way that it is expressed across Arohe. If we look over at our Taupō Museum, why does the museum have to be bound between foundations and walls? I mean, if we look across our whole rohe, we're sitting right in front of one of the greatest pieces of art across the country, and that's Taupō Moana. We're looking across at, again, the most greatest pieces of artwork. That's our Kāhui Maunga, Tongariro, Ruapehu, Pihanga, and Tauhara, again, behind us. So I think in terms of art, looking at just exactly what we have in our district and how we can express that and appreciate that artwork doesn't always need to be, it can be appreciated by the natural landscapes and our natural environment, our taiao, and everything that gives us. And I think when we start viewing the world in that way, we start to see that art and history are not actually just bound in the walls of the museum, but there's an opportunity there again to expand. And also, if we had, as a council, strong relationships across the district with our iwi and with our hapu, we would understand that iwi and hapu have their own art and their own whare taonga in the works, in the pipeline. All of our marae across the rohe are a reflection of that, and are a reflection of our culture across the rohe. We have kohanga reo, ECE in schools. I'm thinking of other districts, other cities who utilise the signage, the actual pictures of the marae and the pictures of the kohanga and ECE on signage as a way to express that type of culture and that art. But I think, yeah, just in consideration to our museum and the artwork, I think that there's a few layers that are attached to it. One of them is an educational piece that comes with art and that comes with the history that's a part of that museum, and how we can kind of broaden our perspective so that we are kind of initiating that type of thought, or provoking that type of thought among our community when it comes to art, heritage, culture and history.
Any other commentary on that? Aidan, we're back to you.
Okay, and lastly, we have facilities management. Again, there seems to be some consensus that this is just an important thing to do, manage our assets appropriately and wisely. And the consensus seems to be, continue to do this work. And the few down in there for the review, most of those are the experts provide the advice about the most efficient and best way to do this, recognising the cost limitations. Is that a fair representation?
Yes, sort of. But we did talk about the housing for the elderly, and we, Councillor Cameron was on a steering group along with Councillor Taylor, I think, am I right? And we didn't actually deal with it, that last long-term plan, and perhaps it's something, a priority we need to deal with at this long-term plan. My personal view is that housing is a government responsibility. I think there's a hangover from the old days, and I do think we need to deal with it this time round.
Thank you for raising that. I just want to point out that one of our later activities we cover will be housing for the elderly on its own, so we can have those conversations then.
Councillor Cameron.
Yep, we've got the general direction of travel bang on. I certainly don't want to see any reduction in what we're doing there. If we're going to be a landlord and look after buildings, we have to do it appropriately, and we have to ensure that we're maintaining those assets. And I certainly understand what it is to maintain some of these assets. Building Run and Fitness compliance, there's a lot of cost involved, but I can't see any way that we can cut back on that. But I do agree we need to make some tough calls and some tough decisions on housing for the elderly, because as a landlord of housing for the elderly, that brings with it some additional challenges that are outside strictly just being a landlord. There are multiple social issues that come along with that as well, and we're simply not equipped to deal with that.
Okay, next steps is we'll take the posters down, we'll tally them up, we'll put them on our little tracking sheet, pencil them in. We'll also write up your questions for things you'd like investigated, and we'll get that all to you at some point. But we'll keep a tracking sheet, and we'll add to this as we go through all the activities. And there will be the review session at the end to confirm, is this the direction, are these the priorities for review, and are these the questions that you'd like answered?
And I'll just quickly ask, how did you find this format? I know it's a little bit different to a workshop, but we were conscious that there is a lot to get through, and we didn't just want to sit here and talk at you. So we just want to, if you want to provide us some feedback, either now or via email, that's fine. Any changes to the future, but otherwise we will continue on this format, trying to work through each of these activity areas. The next one is next Tuesday, so you will be getting some reading from us shortly, and we'll see you then.
If you're wanting feedback now, I found it really useful to be in the smaller groups with a staff member there. You can just get really efficient, right? Direct questions and answers, feedback, hear other people's opinions if we're in a small group. I learnt lots, and found it quite good. Thank you.
Same.
Councillor Foreman.
Same. I liked it, but can I just make a small suggestion? that we have maybe 3 groups and split up into smaller groups so we can talk to the experts a little bit more. So no bottleneck, we can get more done.
Any other? Oh, Steve, sorry.
Just supporting, off the back of my initial comments, I think we're feeling like we're getting into our groove. So, yeah, it's good. Maybe chocolate fish.
Definitely some snacks. Okay, no, that's really awesome. Thank you very much for that. We have finished early, so unless there's... Yes, we have. So unless there's anything else that you would like from us, we can
Just through the
close
chair,
out.
one comment I'd make. Actually found it really quite helpful. Good process. My only concern is that a lot of it we're already going, do the same or do more, and then we're going to throw it all together and go, actually, we can't do that. So just a word of caution, I guess, for us all when we come to the next lot. We want to do the same or more. We just simply can't. So I'm just, it's a bit of a dynamic tension because individually each subject is fantastic and you look at it and go, really valuable, really cool. But in the whole big mix of things, it's going to create some more challenges for us.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I'm not sure we've actually helped you all that much because we just want everything to be, the same or better if we can. But hopefully we've given you enough of a steer. And I too really appreciated having the staff in the room. I learnt a lot myself, and just appreciate the time and effort that everyone's put into today. Thank you.
Councillor Delatorre.
While I agree with Kevin and Rachel, I'd also say that there was quite a bit of brainstorming around different opportunities in terms of assets that we do have and what we could do with those. We were talking about different ways that if we did want to make any changes, that recognising that there'd also need to be a different income stream. So I think you'll notice on the sticky notes actually some ideas around funding and a realisation from everyone that we're not going to be able to do the same and more without opportunity costs or increasing revenue elsewhere.
As Aidan mentioned, we are keeping a tracking sheet. So it will start to become visible as we go through where we do probably need to work back and revisit some areas to try and identify where some of those changes and savings can be made. And again, we'll get to that as we wrap up at the end of it. So yeah, it's all an adventure.
That reminds me of a comment made at the mayoral forum recently. One of the mayors was going to let one of their tar-sealed roads revert back to metal to save money. Councillor Leonard, I couldn't help thinking about you when that came in. They were quite serious about it.
I have
Anyway.
heard of that happening in Southland, yeah. It's,
So, Kendall and Aidan, thank you very much for putting this together. It has been an enlightening experience. You can hear from around the table, everyone appreciated the opportunity. Please keep up the good work. The challenge is going to be prioritising everything we want done.
Oh, and if I may, can I just thank the staff in the room too? I know that a number of them don't normally come to council, so it's lovely to see some new faces, and hopefully you've met some new people today too, so thank you.
So thank you very much. So we have the closing karakia.